Please welcome Louisiana Representative Steve Scalise.
All right.
Mr. Scalise,
Good to see you, Rachael.
how are you? Thanks for
Doing
coming.
well. All right.
All right. Back-to-back interviews, no break for me.
Yeah, you're working nonstop.
Yeah. It's all good things, good problems.
Yeah.
Okay, so given all the talk about Saturday's assassination attempt of Donald Trump, I am glad to be joined here by our next guest, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, who, as many of you guys know, has been on the receiving end of political violence himself. You'll remember that just a few years ago, Scalise almost died when a deranged gunman showed up at the Congressional Republicans' morning baseball practice and started shooting at them. As somebody who was covering House Republicans at the time, I remember how terrifying and awful it was, not just for you, but for your staff, for your family, and your colleagues. And so I want to actually start there. Just give me your reaction to the tragedy on Saturday. I mean, I'm sure it brought back a lot of horrible memories for you.
Yeah, it did. My wife and I were, just at the house going through some things, and we didn't even have the TV on, and then all of a sudden our phone starts blowing up, and did you see that President Trump was shot? And you're not thinking anything like that could happen, and similar to baseball field, you don't think something like that's going to happen, and then it did, and so immediately we turned the TV on, and it was still real early and all of that, and you see blood coming from his head, and I mean, obviously, you think the worst, you think something really bad might happen, and a lot of emotions started coming back. I immediately started praying because I know the power of prayer is very real. I know that your body does shut down. I mean, when I was hit, I almost lost my life, and yet I didn't feel that way at the time because, adrenaline kicks in. You're amazingly, your body just kind of numbs you from the real pain you should be feeling.
Wow.
And so I knew as I saw him get up, it was great to see him get up, and and he clenches his fist, and I thought it was incredibly reassuring to the crowd. But I also knew that doesn't mean he's okay, because his body might be okay at the moment, but there could be some more severe wounds. We even saw that with Reagan.
Right.
Reagan thought he was fine. He gets in the car, and as they're driving,
He's
they
making
realize
jokes in the hospital.
There was a worse wound. He almost lost his life, and no one thought that either. So until he got to the hospital and they said he's okay, I wasn't comfortable that he was okay, because I knew even though he was looking fine getting to even the beast where they took him away, that there still could have been something worse with the rapid fire. But as then it played out later, and you watch the audio especially, and I heard the pop, 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 it was eerily similar. That sound was eerily similar to what happened in 2016 or 17. And then the shooter down comments, when they said shooter down, that's exactly what they said on the ball field in 2017. So a lot of those emotions came back. But I'll tell you this, I mean, when I was in the hospital the night of the shooting, my wife had flown up from New Orleans with our young kids, and, they didn't know if I was going to make it through the night. President Trump and Melania came to the hospital that night and, spent a lot of time just consoling her and the kids. And for almost every week after, for weeks, he would just call her randomly to check in on her. And it's a side of the president that people don't see. He's got an incredibly warm side. Yeah, he would just call Jennifer, and and he would just say, how are you doing? How are the kids doing? And, and he had his doctor at the time was Ronnie Jackson, who's now my colleague. Ronnie would be checking in to see, and we gave him permission, but checking in to see how I was doing, because the president himself wanted updates on how my condition was. He's a man that's got incredible compassion. And, I reached out to him later that day, just to check on him, and was so glad to know he was doing okay. But, it was just a sad day, but a day that brought back a lot of memories.
Everybody's been a lot of Republicans have been trying to get a hold of him and just talk to him. Have you been, what did he say to you back? Like, what was his sort of?
It was just a short conversation, but it was just, he's, again, his spirits are incredibly upbeat. And I think he recognizes this moment that, a lot of people are looking to him, including some people maybe that had written him off, that maybe are giving him a second look, because the rhetoric has been so hypercharged, and some of the things said about him, for years, people comparing him to Hitler and the end of the world, and democracy will end if You know, I mean, that's the stuff that needs to
J.D.
dial
Vance
down.
compared him to Hitler, actually, at one point,
Yeah,
a long
but
time
you know,
ago.
I do think hopefully we're going to see a dialing down of that kind of rhetoric. I mean, clearly there are political differences, you know, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, between a lot of us in the House on the Republican and Democrat side. Americans have differences with their neighbors. The political differences are fair game. Like, talk about those in a civil way, but we shouldn't demonize a person. You know, the person shouldn't be what you demonize. And hopefully everybody looks in the mirror and says, is there something we can do to dial it down that we're doing? And I hope everybody does that.
I'm going to come back to that in a second. But just to go back to former President Trump, you could tell watching him come into the arena last night that he is a changed man after Saturday. I mean, the sort of swagger you see that sort of emanates from him wherever he goes, it wasn't there. I swear there was a point when I was watching the TV screen that it looked like he was about to start crying. And look, anybody who has gone through, you know, trauma like this is going to be shaken to their core and affected by it. And I'm wondering how you going through this situation has changed you, not just physically, but also mentally, and how did you get through that?
Yeah, you know, and I know when I came back to Congress, it took me 3.5 months, and a lot of people say, you know, how have you changed? You know, have you changed what you think or what you? And that's not. I didn't change my views, but your perspective changes absolutely. I mean, when you know you're that close from not making it. You know, I thought about my kids. I thought about my wife. I wanted to see, you know, my friends again. Like, those were the things you thought about. And we all have jobs, and you know, I have a job that's got, you know, a lot of other. I represent 750,000 people in Congress. I'm the majority leader of the House. All of those things are important, but that's not what your life is about. You know, your life is about the family and friends and the things that you do when you're in your free time. And, you know, just the perspective, I think, changed for me. And I think maybe his perspective changes too. I'm not going to speak for him, but I saw that too last night. I do think there's kind of a different reckoning of, you know, your awareness of what really is important in life. It crystallizes it, because it doesn't change your views, but it absolutely crystallizes what's important in life. And he is a man who always viewed himself as somebody who, you know, he's made his money. He's been successful in life. He fights for other people. And I think his focus on what's at stake, not just for himself, but other people, might be sharper too.
Did you, I don't know if you ever experienced this in the wake of the shooting against you, but were there ever points where you felt like fear or like alertness sort of creep in randomly in the weeks and months afterwards, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, you know, it was weird. I never had that kind of PTSD type feeling. You know, in my situation, I mean, for really the first month, they didn't know if I was going to make it, because I had a couple of relapses where, you know, an infection set in, and I didn't, you know, they thought I might get out in a month and a half, and then I had another infection, and boom, there you go, you got another big setback. So I was focused really on getting better, and I had a choice to make early off. You know, do you try to feel sorry for yourself, or do you try to focus on getting better? And I made an early decision, you know, rip the rearview mirror off. I'm not going to look behind me, because if I do, that's only negative energy. I needed to look forward. I needed to learn how to walk again. I mean, I had a lot of things I had to put all of my energy in doing, and I wouldn't have done that if I was splitting time between, gee whiz, why did it happen, or, you know, woe is me. I mean, I'm alive. I'm lucky. I am lucky to be alive. Now I need to focus on getting better, and that's where I put my energy, and it served me well, because from that point on, it was just amazing how I was not able to worry about what had happened. I got to just focus on getting better and then getting back to doing the things I want. When I got back to Congress, it was wonderful to be able to go back to work. And, you know, I think with President Trump, you know, you saw him, I think he just felt really good to be around the people who love him. I mean, there's thousands of people in that arena, and there's millions of people around this country who love President Trump. And I think, I mean, they just announced today that he and J.D. Vance are going to do a rally in Michigan. You know, you can't live in fear. If you live in fear, you're done. And so he needs to get back out. Obviously, Secret Service, you know, and there's going to be a focus on what needs to get better there. But he's got to be able to focus on just doing what he's always done and what he loves doing, and inspiring so many people who, I think more people are going to be looking to him for inspiration. And I think there is a recognition amongst President Trump now that there is that ability to maybe reach more people. And so go out and do that, but don't look back.
It's interesting, because my next question was actually about what advice you would give to former President Trump as he's sort of dealing with this in the coming days. But, you know, it sounds like you're saying don't retreat. Like, go out, be out there. Like,
just be who you are, but with that renewed focus. I mean, I do think there is a different focus that he has now that will make him a better leader. And he's already been a great leader, but I think this just brings him to a different level.
So I remember when you were shot, there was an outpouring of gratitude amongst, Republicans, Democrats, staffers for your Capitol Police detail that saved your life and actually killed the gunman. We are seeing a very different reaction with the Secret Service here. A lot of people calling for investigations, for the Secret Service director to resign. I'm wondering, how are these situations different?
Yeah, with the security of any president or former president, obviously there is, Secret Service's job is to protect presidents and former presidents, and they always have a high level of detail, advance, all of that, and so any event that they go to, and Donald Trump's in a unique position because he's a former president who is running for president, the leading candidate for president. So it's not just like, President George W. Bush, who, if he went to a restaurant tonight, he's going to have Secret Service protection. They're going to take it serious. But Donald Trump is not just going to a restaurant. He's going to a rally with thousands of people and secure and unsecure perimeters. All of those things are things that the Secret Service deals with on a regular basis when they're doing their job. That's the area of scrutiny that you're seeing. Obviously, we're going to be having a hearing on that next week with our Oversight Committee and our Homeland Security Committees. I think there's still a lot of questions that have been raised that are very valid that our committee members and I think the American people still want answered.
Absolutely. I've heard a lot of concern that the Secret Service hasn't been forthcoming with information. First of all, you've been briefed. You know some of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes right now, but do you feel that they're not being forthcoming enough with you guys about what happened? And how does this compare with the sort of flow of information your staff and your family got, right after your situation?
Yeah, I've been very frustrated with the lack of information. I think the Secret Service head should have been out publicly, right away. I mean, you saw the local law enforcement who were not point. I mean, Secret Service runs point on that event, and they obviously work with local law enforcement and other federal agencies, but it is Secret Service's primary responsibility. And the fact that you had the local law enforcement giving a press conference, frankly being asked questions that the head of the Secret Service should have been asked, and she, kind of was nowhere to be found during that period. And yet they took those tough questions. She's got to answer tough questions. You can't hide from them. You can't say, well, it was the slope of the roof was a little too tough for us to monitor. Of course, a 20-year-old kid was able to monitor and climb up that roof. That wasn't too tough. Those are not the answers that we're looking for. I know in the shooting in 2017, one of the frustrations we had is it was initially designated by the FBI as suicide by cop. Here you had a shooter that tried to kill every cop on the ball field, and they called it suicide by cop. I mean, David Bailey and Crystal Griner with Capitol Police are true heroes. Both were shot during the shootout and kept going after the shooter until they took him out. He wanted to kill not just me, but everybody. There were over a dozen members of Congress on that ball field. Later, to their credit, it took over 2 years, but Congressman Brad Wenstrup, one of the heroes of that day, kept pressing the FBI in an open hearing, finally got the new FBI director to acknowledge, I'm going to go relook at that, and within days he reclassified it as domestic terrorism, which it was. At least the FBI in this case was quick to classify it as a suicide attempt, or as assassination attempt on the president. They didn't try to say suicide by cop, but I do think the FBI, who's running point on the investigation, at least started off the right way with the call of this was an assassination attempt. The FBI back then called it suicide by cop, and so their initial approach was not the tone we wanted to see. Today, I think it's different, and hopefully they're aggressive in finding out if there are answers to be found, that we get those.
Do you think the Secret Service director should step down?
I think she should. I've been very disappointed in her lack of candor. I think the American people need to see whatever the answers are. Tough questions. You got to take the tough questions. You take a position like that. These are days, whether it's Homeland Security Chief or Secret Service Director, you can't have a bad day. And, every day you do your job, the bad guy only has to be right once. We know how that works. And we put a lot of resources in place to make sure they have the tools they need. The questions, where were the drones? All of those other things. There's a lot of technology available that was not used, and we still haven't gotten basic questions answered like that.
So you mentioned rhetoric. Yesterday, President Biden apologized for saying that the party needs to put Trump in the bullseye to donors just a few days ago. And I know you've said that the left, you feel, needs to cool the language when it comes to attacking Trump. But what about former President Trump and Republicans? Is there anything that you think your party needs to do to take the temperature down? And I guess I'm also thinking about people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who were out there saying that, this was a directive from Biden and, that the Democrats were somehow in on this. I mean, that's not helpful.
Well, Marjorie
right?
spoke at the convention last night, and I thought it was a very good tone. But at the end of the day, everybody needs to look in the mirror. But it's not just elected officials, and I've been clear about this. I mean, obviously, elected officials are going to be scrutinized at a much higher level. But in the mainstream media, late-night talk show hosts, I mean, you can't turn on a late-night talk show right now without the host usually giving their entire monologue trashing Donald Trump. And this has been going on for years. This isn't recent. It's not a new phenomenon. And I mean, in the case of the shooting in 2017, the shooter said one of the things that charged him was not just language from the left, but it was Rachael Maddow. He watched her show, and that language turned him too. So, everybody's got to look in the mirror and say, can we do better? And I think they can. I mean, Morning Joe got taken off the air yesterday. Sad indictment, but, the network didn't even feel they could trust their anchors to go through 3 hours without saying something that might be hypercharged. I mean, they've got to look in the mirror, and their only anger today was that they got taken off yesterday.
Not the Republicans have to look in the mirror.
Well, but everybody
yes.
needs.
Yeah.
But everybody needs to look in the mirror. But the fact that some that are causing some of this don't want to look in the mirror.
I mean, somebody tried to
problem.
take a hammer to Nancy Pelosi, ended up getting her husband. I mean, like,
right. And we all call those incidents out. I called that incident out immediately, reached out to Nancy and talked to Paul as well. And none of those incidents are acceptable. And at the same time, we just need to say, if there's language that's helping contribute to that, dial the language down. Disagree on policy. Again, we're going to have those disagreements. That's why we have a presidential campaign. But if you find yourself just going after the character of the other person, maybe you've lost the debate. You need to find something else to go and criticize, but stop the hypercharged stuff. And again, all these comparisons to Hitler and other things, I mean, it's been going on for too long. It's got to stop.
I want to get to a potential Republican agenda in 2025 in a minute, and also the House map expanding. But one last sort of question on this. Trump, like you, is now a victim of, or survivor, I should say, survivor of gun violence. And so naturally, some people are asking, as they always do in these tragic situations, if something should be changing on gun control issues here in Washington. And you'll recall that former President Trump, when he was in the White House, he actually was talking to Democrats about potentially doing some sort of gun restrictions. I remember that maybe not Oval Office meeting, but there was a White House meeting where he said, "Are you afraid of the NRA?" to the Republicans. I mean, you can tell that he has flirted with this issue before. Do you foresee any gun changes at the national level under a Trump administration, given what happened to the former president?
Yeah, and I know this comes up a lot of times. In 2017, I was asked that right after the shooting. Gee whiz, should now we, limit people's gun rights today? I don't agree with that, because at the end of the day, we still don't even know how he got the gun. His father had the gun. Did his father give him the gun? Did he steal the gun from his father? I mean, in so many cases, and look, there's a lot of data on gun crimes in America, which, by the way, are not the #1 killer of people. But, that's where the focus seems to be. In most cases, the gun was stolen. And this is handguns are still the primary cause of gun deaths. And so I don't hear anybody suggesting we take away handguns. Maybe a few people on the left do. I sure don't. But at the end of the day, we have a crime problem. We also have other problems with mental health. And mental health seems to get lost in the shuffle all the time. Don't know if that was the case in this incident yet. Maybe we will find out more. But at the same time, let's go and find out what really happened. But taking away the guns from law-abiding citizens is never been proven to be the answer, because most of the states with the toughest gun laws in the country, I mean, the shooter in my case was living in Illinois, which has the toughest gun laws in the country. And yet he still got the gun, and he still tried to take all of us out. So, just taking away the rights of law-abiding citizens is not the answer. The Second Amendment's in the Constitution for a reason.
You mentioned mental health. Republicans often talk about this. If Republicans control all of Washington next year, I mean, what will you guys actually do on mental health? What are we talking about here? More funding? More? I mean, like, what are we?
There's a lot. You go back and look into the 1970s when a lot of real changes were made. You had mental institutions where people that had serious mental health problems were placed for care. And a lot of those were shut down by the government. And I think they thought it might have been a stigma. And so a lot of those people that were in those institutions getting care just ended up getting thrown out on the streets. A lot of them ended up in prisons. A lot of them are homeless, just out on the streets right now. It's not like the problem got solved. They just, in the name of, oh, let's get rid of what we think is a problem, they never had an alternative for it. And so they just sent a lot of people with mental health problems out onto the streets to fend for themselves. It's not a good answer. And I do think we need to go revisit, the results of those decisions from decades ago that never really have been looked at again, and then help the states. There are some states that are going to be more innovative than others at dealing with this. Let's go and highlight the areas where states have been successful and then replicate that in other places.
I was going to say, in theory, people who are struggling with mental health issues who have been hospitalized, without their consent are not supposed to be able to get a gun. But I'm wondering, would Republicans do something on that in terms of making sure guns don't fall into the hands of people who are in a crisis mode?
Well, if you look at right now the flexibility, and there are states, again, that have done this well, but it is very, very hard for other states to replicate it because of our laws. Medicaid, for example, very, very rigid in terms of what federal tax dollars can do for health care. If a state has a really good idea, they really aren't given the flexibility to go and try that out. We need to flex some of that money. And we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars that are spent. This is not something that we're shortchanging. That's not being spent in the best way. And so let's go look and see, are there better ways to spend those dollars? Can we give states more flexibility to do smarter things with the money that's out there?
I'm going to come back to election issues because I know you really want to talk about House expanded map. But first, I want to make sure we give some time to a Republican agenda in 2025, because if the election were today, pretty much all of my Republican and Democratic sources think that you guys are going to have a trifecta.
I like your sources, by the way.
You like the Democratic sources too? They'll have a White House, you'll have both chambers of Congress. And so let's talk about what are the top priorities for the party.
Yeah, we've been talking about this a lot, and this isn't measuring drapes. It's saying, okay, we're very focused on the election. And in the House, that's our focus. We want to help President Trump. The Senate is looking really good too, but in some states, take a state like Pennsylvania or Michigan, where you have an opportunity to help President Trump win that state and flip a Senate seat and win at least 2 House seats, both of those states. We're spending a lot of time, all of us together, working as much as we can together in those kind of states, but we're talking about real issues. And the good news is, over these last year and a half, as we've had big disagreements with President Biden on policy, we've not just said we don't like President Biden's border plan. We don't. He has had an open border plan. He's taken specific actions to open the border that he can reverse, and he's made a clear choice not to close the border.
He's taken some executive action,
but they've not worked, and I think it's by design. And so what we did is said, okay, it's one thing to say you don't like what's going on. You don't like how the economy is not really meeting the needs of low and middle income people. But it's not good enough to say what you don't like. If you're going to be a leader, if you're going to be a legislative chamber that wants to show the country you can deliver results, you've got to show your alternative. What's your bill? And not just bullet points. What is your bill that's going to fix that problem? And so we have brought many bills to the floor, this Congress, even with a 1 or 2 seat majority some of those weeks, where we brought a bill to the floor, H.R. 1, showing the country how we can produce our own energy again at a lower cost. One of the biggest drivers of inflation right now, when you go to the grocery store, why are you paying so much for food? It's not just regulations, it's also the high cost of energy to get that food to the grocery store. When you go to the pump to fill up your car, when you're paying your electricity bill in your house, you're paying way too much. You're paying 40% more in most states because of Joe Biden's policies. So we brought a bill to fix that, to show the country how you can have better energy policy, not just talking points. And that bill, H.R. 1, is over in the Senate. H.R. 2, you don't like the border? How do you fix it? We don't just talk about it. We passed a bill, H.R. 2. It was not easy to put that coalition together because every Democrat voted no. They said, we don't want to solve the problem. They did not want to be a part of our coalition to put that bill together. And so you look at our Republican majority, we have a lot of different viewpoints. Not all Republicans feel the same way. And so I put a coalition together last year of about 5 different viewpoints on immigration and border policy within our conference to ultimately put together H.R. 2 and pass what everybody categorizes as the strongest border security bill passed by Congress in decades. And it was hard to do because it hasn't been done in a long, long time, but we did it. and we showed the country how you can do it. We passed a Parents' Bill of Rights to show parents how they can be more involved in their kids' education. You know, tax policy is going to be front and center as well to make sure we don't have a $5 trillion tax hike. President Biden said he wants all the Trump tax cuts to expire. That means, and let's be clear about this, using Biden's own numbers, that means a $5 trillion tax hike on Americans. Everyone will feel that pinch. To think only people making over $400,000 will be affected by it is a lie. You can go look at the data from CBO and Joint Committee on Tax. If you're making less than $100,000 a year, you'll pay over $2,200 a year in more taxes under Biden's plan. So we say, no, we don't want a tax hike on anybody. We want to get the economy moving again. We want to create jobs again. All of that's going to be front and center, and we can do a lot of that in budget reconciliation in just the first 100 days of a Republican majority with the House, Senate, and White House in place. And I think it'll be something this country would be excited about because we can turn this country around in a very short period of time.
Let's break some of that up here. You mentioned a lot of ideas right there. So first of all, reconciliation. We'll just start right there since that was the last thing you mentioned. You've tasked committee chairs with coming up with ideas of what you can actually do with reconciliation. The number one thing I keep hearing from people is taxes. And the Trump era taxes, as you mentioned, are going to expire. Do you envision Republicans using that to just extend them, or do you want to go even further, cut corporate taxes even more? Like, what are Republican leaders thinking about taxes? Is it just an extension, or are there certain things you want to go even lower?
Well, it's still early, and like I said, you know, we have to win everything first. None of this happens if we don't win the White House, Senate, and White House. So let's be crystal clear about that. But if we do, I mean, I've sat down with President Trump months ago at Mar-a-Lago talking through what he wants to do, because, you know, he's the president of the United States. If he wins, he will be the driver of this as well. And we worked very closely with him back in 2017 when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was, by the way, one of the most successful pieces of legislation that helped rebuild our middle class, which was we were losing millions of jobs. Great companies were leaving America. I mean, go back and look in 2016 and prior, we were losing great companies to foreign nations. We turned that around. And so if those tax cuts expire, those rates go back up again, we could lose those companies again easily to other countries. So we want to lock in those rates. Can we go lower? Let's look and see. You know, President Trump's talked a lot about getting rid of the tax on tips. I think that's something important to look at. I've been looking at it. I've talked to President Trump about this a number of times because, you know, he's still talking about it a lot on the campaign trail, and he's committed to it. And so it's something we're going to look at working into this whole plan. Ultimately, you're going to have a big negotiation if we get everything between the House, Senate, and the White House to put it together. That's how we did it in 2017. I was the majority whip when we did it. And there were a lot of back and forth conversations. And budget reconciliation is an important tool. You know, for most people, they don't know what that means. It's the ability to get a bill through the Senate with 51 votes instead of 60. It's a powerful tool from that regard, but it has limitations. And so you have to first work within those limitations. And so your question is, if I want to do that, can that fit into that narrow limitation of budget reconciliation? And if the answer is yes, you also have financial limitations to that as well. And so whatever you want to do is great, but you put it all in and then it's all got to add up. And it did in 2017 and it worked phenomenally. And our economy never was better when you look at the results in 2017, 18, 19, before COVID shut the economy down. Our economy in America was the envy of the world. We can get back to that. And so can we go further? I'd like to see us.
Is there a target?
Yeah, there are numbers that we're looking at on things. Again, it's all about making sure middle and low income families who are struggling the hardest get the biggest benefit. They got the biggest benefit, by the way, of the 2017 bill. The lower and middle income families did the best by far. And those are using the federal government's numbers after the fact. You look at tax revenue coming in. We rebuilt our middle class by doing that. Let's keep helping grow more opportunity for people that are working their way up.
So you mentioned you met with former President Trump about agenda items.
Yeah.
Is he behind H.R. 2? I mean, I know that there's a lot of Democrats who, frankly, despise that bill. They're petrified of it, too.
Why don't they want a secure border?
Do you envision that is actually something that you can get through the Senate and that Donald Trump would sign?
We're sure going to try it again. I mean, at least in a Republican Senate, you would get a vote on it. Chuck Schumer refuses to bring that up. And, you know, the idea of a bill that secures the border that we didn't just come up with on our own. You know, many of us, myself included, Speaker Johnson, most of our members went to the border multiple times. We met with our Border Patrol agents. They'll let us in bed with them. And so you can go through a shift change at 11 o'clock at night, which is when a lot of people come across the border illegally. immediately because they know there's a shift change. They know where the openings are. The gotaways that you hear about. And by the way, they're undercounting the gotaways. And so they know where those areas are. They know where, if you want to come in and be found so you can get your little court date 6 years from now, which over 90% of people don't even show up for, they come in and get that too. So they told us what the problems were, and we put all that in the form of a bill called H.R. 2. President loves all those ideas. Now, many of these can be done by the president himself. Remain in Mexico is a protocol that President Trump negotiated with the president of Mexico. Joe Biden ended it because it was working. Why? Ask Joe Biden why he ended that policy that was working so well. Just because Trump did it and it worked. So Joe Biden ended it. He won't renegotiate it. President Trump can renegotiate that. He doesn't need it in a bill, but we had that in H.R. 2. You look at ending of catch and release. Again, all of our Border Patrol agents will tell you they don't want to catch somebody who could be a hardened criminal coming from a jail in a foreign country, and they, by law, now have to release them. And they go off, and we've seen, Lake and Riley Act, all the people that have gone and murdered civilian, innocent citizens who were criminals in other countries. So end, catch, and release, that is in our bill. President Trump can invoke that on his own. So some of that are things President Trump could do. Some of it, he needs more money to complete building of the wall. So we could put more money into a reconciliation bill, more technology for drones. The Border Patrol agents would love more technology. We could put that into budget reconciliation. A lot of ways to get this done, but it starts at the top. President Biden could do a lot of this on his own. He refuses to. He ended a lot of those policies that were working. President Trump can put that back in place.
I am being signaled that I have to wrap up because John Cornyn is here, Senator John Cornyn. But I gotta say, just very quickly, clearly Joe Biden put a bill forward. And Republicans in the House didn't want anything to do with it. So, wouldn't it have been better even to just get some solutions to these border problems?
If you read the bill, and believe me, we've gone and actually read the bill. The text of the bill matters. Joe Biden says, hey, I've got a bill. Go read his bill. It baselines 5,000 people illegally a day before it's identified as a problem. Johnson, who was the Homeland Security Secretary under Obama, said 1,000 people illegally a day is a crisis. And Joe Biden wants to baseline 5,000? That would be in law.
It would have ended catch and release, right? And it would have made sure people don't wait 6 years.
Guess what? Joe Biden can end catch and release today with a pen. He can do that today without a bill. But if you baseline 5,000 people a day is okay, then that means President Trump can't fix that problem if it's 1,000 people a day. 1,000 is too many. Why would you say 5,000 is okay under law? That's not in law right now. Don't put bad policy in law, because then it can't be undone without 60 votes in the Senate. If you look at what President Biden could do today, he refuses to do it. President Trump will do that on his first day in office with a pen. Then let's go get the rest of the things you can't do, either in law through reconciliation or through a bill that might take 60 votes in the Senate. We're going to be trying all of those avenues. But the country, this is the #1 issue, and Joe Biden created this problem, and he refuses to fix it. And by the way, Kamala Harris is in charge of the border. Anybody thinks she's doing a good job there?
They're going to come in here and carry us out, I think, because we're going way over.
We cover a lot of territory.
Thank you, Mr. Scalise. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.